Hello and welcome to 700 Club Kenya. We are honored to have with us the Ambassador of Israel in Kenya, Ambassador Joseph Oded. And Kenya, as we know, has been having good relations with Israel for many years, even before independence in Kenya. So we are privileged to have him here with us to tell us more about what his nation is doing here in Kenya and his stay in Kenya. Ambassador Oded has been here for less than a year now. So he's going to tell us more about his stay, how he's had the time in Kenya, and what they're doing about COVID. Kindly introduce yourself to us, Ambassador.
My name is Oded Joseph, and as you've said, I'm the Ambassador of Israel since late August 19. I'm very privileged to be here. Our embassy here in Kenya covers our relations with Kenya and 4 additional countries in the region: Uganda, Tanzania, Malawi, and the Seychelles. So I'm very privileged to be appointed here as the ambassador and covering our relations with these very important countries for Israel. My stay here in Kenya has been until now very, very pleasing for me. I'm very happy to be here. It's wonderful for me to meet the Kenyan people, to get exposed to the Kenyan scenery. And it's a very challenging and a very fruitful experience for me. So I'm happy. I'm happy to be here in Kenya, and I'm happy to be here, hosted by yourselves.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to our show. We have been reading in the news recently about Israel conducting research for a cure for COVID-19. And you know, this is a pandemic that has affected very many countries. So we don't know how far Israel is in that research. Maybe you can tell us more about that. And also tell us how Israel has been coping with the COVID pandemic in Israel and as your embassy here in Kenya.
Well, naturally, COVID-19 is a global pandemic, and it affects us all. It affects us in a manner that I think we are just now only starting to begin the real implications of this pandemic, and probably many research and discussions and conventions will be held around this very important subject. As you've mentioned, of course, the pandemic affected Israel too. We're a small nation of 9 million people. We have already more than 17,000 cases in Israel. Thank God, the vast majority of them already recovered. So now we have around 2,000 active cases in Israel. Unfortunately, 285 people died in that pandemic in Israel. And like many other countries, like Kenya, we have taken serious measures to prevent and to try and overcome the pandemic. First of all, by making sure that we change our normal and daily behavior, maintaining, as we do here today, social distancing, making sure that we have, keep our hygiene. So we're doing our best, and of course, measurements that ask people to stay at home and to go out only when it's necessary. We are at a stage that we have managed to flatten the curve, and we have much less cases today. So the government has decided just recently to initiate what we call the exit strategy and gradually try to get back to normal. I think we all understand that COVID-19 is to be with us for the near future, so we can't really go back to normal as we knew it in the past, but we all have to adapt. You're right, we are, like other places in the world, we are making a lot of efforts for research, trying to find ways to overcome this pandemic, to prevent this pandemic, to find a vaccine. This is being held in a few institutions in Israel, a lot of it with cooperation with the other countries. And I think we are seeing progress in this research, but of course we still cannot, like others, say that we have reached a point where we do have a full vaccine. The research in Israel and the technologies in Israel are not only focused on trying to develop a vaccine, which of course this is the goal of all of us. We are also trying to find technologies of prevention and treating the pandemic, treating the virus. Many technologies are being utilized to try and monitor better the extent of the pandemic. So we are very, very much focused on, as I've said, adapting technologies that we have already created in Israel in other places to make sure that we have a better monitoring, a better treatment, and better prevention of this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so as you've mentioned, we can see like Israel is starting to open up the businesses, and a few places we've seen people are coming back to work. So we hope that the measures have also been put in place for this. This is a new thing, as you've said, we are trying to cope with. So what are the things that Israel has put in place to, by the time they're letting out the people to go back to work?
I think, again, very similar to the challenges that Kenya is facing. There is always this fine line that you try to meet between the necessity to fight the pandemic in an effective manner, which, as we've said, forces us to be more at home, to social distance ourselves and so on. And on the other hand, you want to go back to normal life, firstly, because we want to go back to normal life, and secondly, because that affects a lot our economy. So as I've said, we are at the stage where we opened up again our education systems. We've increased the numbers of people who go out to work as normal. Even some restaurants and pubs have began to open. The challenge is to make sure that people are not complacent about it, and people are not, developing the sense that as if the pandemic is over. And we are still struggling with this. So just for an example, after we've opened up the education system, we did find more cases in some of the cities in Israel. So that again forced us to do a rethinking. I think this is a process that all countries, all governments are now dealing with. How do you, on the one hand, fight this pandemic in the most effective manner, but still allow people to go back gradually to normal life and to open back the economy? So we are dealing exactly with that. I can give you another example. As part of the exit strategy, we are now also considering opening our skies again, opening direct flights again to some of the destinations after discussing with the relevant governments in those countries to make sure that we could allow tourism to go back almost to normal, but in a manner that also keeps them safe. So there are many actions that we're taking to try to balance between our necessity to continue fighting this pandemic and, on the other hand, going back to normal life.
Okay. I'm glad you have mentioned about direct flights. And Israel was at a stage of discussing direct flights from Kenya. As you know, we have very many Kenyans who go to Israel for pilgrimage, for medical, reasons, and just for tourism. So we don't know how far that was before COVID. Of course, COVID interrupted everything. But we don't know how far, because many Kenyans are eager about the direct flights to Israel, maybe to get to a point where Rwanda is,
Well, personally, this is one of my priorities. So I very much hope to see very soon, again, us establishing direct flights between Israel and Kenya. And as you've mentioned yourself, Israelis are in love with Kenya. They arrive here even though there are no direct flights. So I can imagine that the numbers will increase, unfortunately, once we have direct flights. People are in love in the safaris and the special tracks that they could have here with the people of Kenya. And I know, as you mentioned yourself, that also Kenyans love arriving in Israel, and we want to see more of that. Want to see more business people coming from Israel to Kenya and from Kenya to Israel, and more engagement also at the political level. So definitely direct flights is an important tool for that. And I'm happy to say that we did make progress with different discussions we had with the relevant government agencies and also with Kenya Airways. And you're right, the pandemic does delay a little bit the scheduling of all this issue, but I'm happy to say that a delegation should have arrived in Israel from here to discuss exactly this issue. And I hope once the situation stabilizes, we would be able to go back with full steam to make sure that we establish direct flights between our two countries. That's, as I said, a very important priority for me.
We are looking forward to that. Yeah, and we have seen in the past the nation of Israel going out to assist other nations in terms of disasters and pandemics, and sometimes being on the front line with humanitarian relief. Could you tell us a few things that Israel could have done during this pandemic? We know it hit all the countries abruptly, but what has the nation of Israel done in the recent past in Israel and maybe in Kenya concerning assisting with the disaster, the pandemic?
Let me first say more generally that one of the things I'm proud about is that that Israel has developed an agency within the foreign ministry called Mashav that is focused on international cooperation, on development, and also on contributing from our knowledge, from our experience, sharing it with other countries. So we're very proud to do that, and we've been doing it, especially also vis-a-vis within our relations with African countries and of course with Kenya. We've been doing it from probably the establishment of Israel. And you're right, also we are trying humbly to also contribute and to see how we could support the fight of this pandemic also here in Kenya. And I've just recently visited the community in Italy, and we've managed to contribute some PPEs, personal protective equipments, and food packages. It was also part of the festivals within Italy, and we are very much focused also as part of the program, the national program of His Excellency the President for the National Project for Hygiene. We also have been very much focused to see how we could humbly contribute towards that end, and we are now partnering with some NGOs here to find ways to support job creation in those areas, and specifically in Italy and other places in Nairobi and in Kenya, because we do believe that job creation that also supports the economy, that also supports the fight against this pandemic is a meaningful contribution, though sometimes it's humble contribution.
Thank you.
Maybe another aspect that I could raise is that we are very much engaged with startups, with the universities. One of the areas that I think is very, very crucial is in this time sharing information, sharing experiences. So we are developing our talks with different agencies, and as I've mentioned also with the local universities, to match students from Israel to students in Kenya, to match startups in Israel and startups in Kenya, to try and find unique solutions, creative solutions to different challenges as this pandemic faces us with. So this engagement between young Israelis and young Kenyans and brainstorming together, I think, is one of the ways to cooperate in a meaningful manner with Kenya.
Okay. I think less than a few weeks ago, Israel has celebrated the 72nd anniversary for the State of Israel. And we know usually this is a big celebration, but this time restricted. So how did Israel celebrate this? In Israel as well as in Kenya, for the Israelis who are in Kenya?
Right. No, you're very right. We've decided that though we are facing this pandemic, we are not going to allow it to stop us from celebrating with our good friends in Kenya. So here, rather than having a regular reception, rather than having a regular gathering, we had a virtual celebration, which was live in our Facebook page. And we had a great reaction and support from our good friends here in Kenya, and also from our good friends in the other 4 accredited countries for our embassy. We had special messages that were written by the leaders, by His Excellency President Kenyatta. We had messages, very, very moving messages that came from children from Kenya, songs, and the amount of love that they've expressed in those clips that they've shared with us in this virtual reception was amazing. So we didn't have a regular reception or a regular celebration, but I must say that I was very moved by the type of support and reactions we received during our virtual reception. In Israel, we've managed to do the regular I would say the regular ceremonies. They were, of course, rather than being done with a happy crowd, in front of the in those events. It happened also virtually. It happened through the TV, with no audience in those ceremonies, but we still held the basic ones. So as much as this pandemic is challenging, we would not allow it to stop the celebrations and our daily life.
Congratulations on your 72nd anniversary. Yes. We also saw recently a new government being sworn in after 3 elections in Israel. And we're just wondering, how is the new government coping? Because this is the first government to be sworn in terms of a pandemic. So what are the challenges that the government was facing just before the swearing in and after they have taken office?
Well, first of all, you were right pointing out that this government was established after 3 elections. This is the very first time in Israel that we went through 3 consecutive elections. And I think the message of the people in Israel was that the people of Israel wanted unity. And I'm happy to say that the government that was established in Israel just recently is a unity government, and is being composed by the 2 main political rivals in the past. And today they are the main 2 partners of this government. And one of the main reasons for establishing a unity government was the recognition that in order for us to effectively cope with this pandemic, we have to do it with joint forces. It's joint forces within Israel, and it's joint forces between Israel and I think the international community. So I think it's only by joining forces, whether internally in Israel and between Israel and other countries, that we will be able to overcome this pandemic.
Oh, okay. And we also understand that this is one of the biggest governments that has been in existence in Israel, with quite a number of ministers. We understand, of course, because of the unity and the coalition. So how is that going to affect the economy of Israel and the running of the government previously from the past?
Well, I don't know. It's the first time we're having such a government. As you said, it's a very big government. But I think what drives, as I said earlier, this government is the sense that it has to be a unity government. And yes, this was one of the reasons that it became to be a very large government. So I think we ourselves are now still in the process of learning how it is going to work. But I believe that the strong sense of the challenges that we're facing, and we're talking about the pandemic, but in Israel it's not only the pandemic. Unfortunately, the security challenges upon Israel has been there since our establishment 72 years ago until today. So I think also in the field of meeting the security challenges, this is an issue that drives and necessitates a unity government. So I believe, when you have a very defined challenge to meet, I think it makes your life easier to know and to show the way of how do you want to overcome it. And I believe that's exactly what the new government will do.
Yes. And also we have seen Israel has been a very resilient country, very strong, despite, as you have said, Israel has faced security challenges since its establishment as a nation, and has overcome a lot of obstacles. So what would be your word to Kenya, especially during this pandemic, and security issues and how to cope with this pandemic? What would be your word to the Kenyan people and the Kenyan government?
Well, first let me say that I think when it comes to Israel, for me, the resilience that we have managed to develop was due to, one, a very strong sense of unity. Jews were forced to be for 2,000 years in exile in different countries. Some of them have been treated nicely by those countries. A lot of them have been treated to a less extent, not very nicely, let me put it this way. But for us, going back to our natural homeland, sharing the same culture, it was very, very natural. Even though we came from different countries in the world, we came back to our natural homeland. We came back to our capital, Jerusalem. We came back to the place, if you open the Bible, you would see all those recognitions of the connections between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. So the sense of unity is probably the most important component of our ability to be resilient. The second is that we had no choice but to fight back against the threats that were forced upon us from the very first day of our arrival back to Israel. We had to develop very quickly a strong military to face those challenges. And otherwise, you know, we would probably have had a different fate. So the sense of urgency was the second component that I think allowed us to develop this resilience. And the third, and that is, I think, very important, is the decision of our leaders from the very beginning, the decision of our founders, to make sure that we take our fate in our own hands only. We do not outcry to others, we do not blame others, we do not ask necessarily for assistance. We first and foremost expect ourselves to meet our own challenges before we ask for additional assistance. Now, I don't know what to take from this. I don't think that I'm in the position to give an advice. So you have a very sound leadership here in Kenya. You have great people in Kenya, and I'm sure that you would know your own way. But I think what worked for us is, as I said, the strong sense of unity, an immediate reaction to the challenges on the ground, and the decision to do things on our own. You might know, I'm sure that you know, we have just celebrated a Jewish festival called Shavuot. This is the Jewish Pentecost. In fact, the Jewish Pentecost this year almost aligns with the Christian Pentecost. I think it's only a gap of a few days. The Jewish Pentecost has two important meanings. One of them is spiritual, and the other one is more, I would say, agricultural, down to earth. The spiritual derives from the fact that during Shavuot, the people of Israel received the Bible from God through the prophet Moses. So this is, of course, a very important event in our life. But the second component of celebrating Shavuot is agricultural. It's more down to earth because we are giving our first harvest of what the soil has produced in Israel. So it's very down to earth, it's very connected to the actions that we do here. And if I come back to your question, I think what I would take from it is that, one, we have to trust the Almighty and the powers that are stronger than us human beings, that we are going to a better place and that things will get better. And the second component has to do, that complements this hope and faith in the Almighty, is also what we do with ourselves. We can't just leave that the situation without reacting ourselves. So I think this is the second component I would take from the festival, that you have to take actions to produce your own goods in your own soil. And if we now relate to the medical situation or the health situation, I would say we have to do our best to join forces together to meet the challenge of this pandemic.
We're looking forward to more cooperation between Israel and Kenya, between the people of Israel and the people of Kenya. And as we've mentioned, even when the flights start, direct flights, we hope for an increase in the tourism in Israel. And we congratulate the State of Israel again and the new government.
Thank you.
Yes. So thank you for watching 700 Club Kenya. Please visit our website and our social media pages. And as we say in CBN, keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Psalms 122 verse 6. They shall prosper that love thee. Call our numbers for prayers anytime, 0728 826 220. That is 0728 826 220. Thank you.
Thank you very much.